Okay. Hello and welcome everyone to our panel discussion, Material Matters, in conjunction with the exhibition Clay Sustains, Vessels of Change. This exhibition is the third in our series Centering, which celebrates the Palo Alto Art Center's role in promoting ceramic art and education. I have many people to thank for making this exhibition possible. First, I should share that I'm Karen Kinzel, the director of the Palo Alto Art Center. Numerous people made this exhibition possible. I want to provide a special thank you to the Palo Alto Art Center Foundation, members and donors of the Palo Alto Art Center Foundation who are supporting our work to bring art to the community. And a very special thank you to Peggy and Yogan Dalal, who have supported our Centering series. I want to thank our exhibition team, led by our amazing preparator, Joe Sachs, and Leanna, Amber, and Ivan, for making this exhibition look so stunning and helping to realize the vision of 18 artists. I also want to acknowledge our exhibition interns, Jesse Martinez and Elke Mueller, who helped to research many of the artists in the show. I also want to thank the amazing 18 Clay Sustains artists, a handful of whom are speaking tonight, and many of whom are in the audience. I saw that Richard Shaw and Leslie Plateau-Smith are here, so welcome you both. And I want to thank all of the artists who have made this show possible. I do want to highlight that the show is up until April 5th, so you have one more month to enjoy the exhibition. And last but not least, I want to thank our guest curator, Rina Faletti. This was the second time that we've worked with Rina. Many of you will remember her Fire Transforms exhibition a few years ago. And I'm now going to turn it over to Rina to start our panel.
Thank you, Karen. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this wonderful opportunity to talk to 5 of the artists from Clay Sustains. Just a little bit of background about how this all happened. It was a year and a half ago that Karen invited me to be guest curator for an exhibition of 15 to 20 exceptional ceramic artists. And we had worked together before, as she mentioned, on Fire Transform. So she knew that I like to work on environmental focuses. And in that year and a half, Karen, staff, interns, and I have considered up to 100 plus artists, mostly all in California, most from the Bay Area, to try to get a group together that could have work that was of exceptional workmanship and also complex ideas behind the work, to be able to investigate this idea of sustainability. We also liked looking at that word in its sort of root word form, which would be to sustain, or the idea of sustenance, and how ceramic work and clay, in addition to all of the varied ideas that each of these artists works on, helps us to live better with art as part of our lives. And so let's get started to talk with 5 of the 18 artists in Clay Sustains. I'll go through a little mini introduction of each of the artists that's here and the slides that I have prepared so that you can see who they are. And when I get to you, just wave and say hi, each of the artists. And then once that's done, I'll ask them some questions and you'll be able to hear from them. Well, my slides will change. That will be helpful. There we go. So our 5 artists are Mitra Fabian, Marsha Godoy-Schindler, Dharma Strasser MacColl, Joan Takayama-Ogawa, and Xiuan Xu. Thank you for joining us today. And then this is the list at the bottom of the flyer that we created of all 18 artists, which you can snap a photo of or take a look at on the website. In addition, if you'd like to see photos of the opening night reception to get an idea of who was here and what the rest of the show looks like, if you have been unable to come and see it in person, go ahead and allow your phone to take a picture of this or search for the Palo Alto Arts Flickr link where you can see lots of photos of the fun that we had with a very large group that night. first, I ordered them in alphabetical order. This is Mitra Fabian. Mitra, you want to give us a little wave there, and her name's there for you to look at, standing next to her work at the opening reception. To see her two works that are in the exhibition a little more closely, Sleeping Through Domestic Dissonance series is what she showed for us. This is a small work, 5 by 10 inches. She'll tell us more about it. And Seeping Through Domestic Dissonance 4 from 2025, which is 15 inches tall. Marsha Godoy-Schindler, Marsha, say hi, is an installation artist, and she created Life Whispers, Listen Carefully from 2025, which is an installation as you see here, and I showed a little detail of the lovely faces that she creates on her tree spirits, and she'll talk more about that work. Dharma Strasser MacColl, say hi, Dharma. There she is. Dharma has a wall-sized work, Freefall 1, which is in the entrance to the exhibition, in addition to showing some porcelain paintings, which are on handmade Japanese paper. Again, she'll talk to us more about those. I've shown these two works together because they're exhibited together in the exhibition, a little bit differently from this. Then you can see their sizes, 42 by 39 for Emerging Geometries 5, so it's a large framed work. And then another Emerging Geometries series, smaller work, 15 by 14, which hangs next to it. And then two other companion works that she created as well, Lucent and Asawa, a tribute to the sculptor, I'm sure. Joan Takayama-Ogawa, seen here working on a fire-related plate that we have in the exhibition, is showing the Tipping Point series. She's showing Bleached Coral Reef and the California wildfires piece that she was shown working on. In addition, she has Around the Edge, which you cannot see clearly, but it's written in gold writing on the rim. A good message for what we're talking about today. How can we defy nature and expect to win? We must follow nature's rules. We must build a profitable, sustainable economy that will work with nature, not against it. We must discover new ways to use waste, produce energy, and save the world. If we fail, nature's invoice will be high. Thank you for stating it that way, Joan. Much appreciated. So Joan will tell us more about her work. In addition to Xiuan Xu, who is showing us two pieces that she makes with porcelain and paper clay, and all of the artists work with glazes, which hopefully they will talk to us in the course of conversation about their glazing techniques, their clay techniques, and their firing techniques, and anything else that that they'd like to show us. And here is another of Xiuan's beautiful works. So enjoy the conversation. I will turn off the everything, excuse me. There we go. And we will have our discussion take place. So first of all, I'd like each artist, I'll call on you like a good teacher. And I'd like you to tell us briefly about your background, any kind of background that you wish briefly that led you to become a ceramic artist as a way of introduction, and how your work reflects on environmental concerns and or the idea of sustainability that we're trying to examine here. There's no exact answer for these ideas of environmental concerns or environmental, or excuse me, sustainability. And so each artist, all of the 18 artists in this exhibition, one of the reasons that we chose them is because there's such a wide variety of the type of work, the materials they work with, and their own artistic and aesthetic and social concerns. So Joan, would you like to start us out and talk to us a little about your background and how you became a ceramic artist and why the environment?
Well, I like to think the late bloomers eventually take over the garden. I didn't start this journey in clay until I was 30 years old, and I spent, I think, the rest of my life just trying to play catch up because my work first started in 1973 as a college freshman at UCLA. studying greenhouse gases for an entire quarter. And it was very clear to me that we might have ourselves a problem. Then I went over to, because I took dating techniques at UCLA, which is carbon-14, potassium, argon. It wasn't the course I thought it was going to be, obsidian hydration, but it gave me even more science than I actually ever thought, which then took me over to Japan, studying over there, and then back to Stanford, over to Stanford in the biological preserve in the education school. So I was really academic all the way. I became a teacher at Crossroads School in Santa Monica, and I've stayed in Los Angeles. I was a dean of the middle school, and then I touched clay and I quit. And clay just has a way of taking over my entire life. But the work has always been environmentally inclined. I do love the title, Material Matters. It does matter. I think you need to know your material well. And I studied with Ralph Becerra, who used to chant that, know your material, know your material, know your material. So I appreciate all of it. And now I'm working on a body of work about living with climate change.
Thank you. Marsha, would you like to talk a little bit about your journey into clay and ceramic work and the environment and sustainability?
Yes. So I didn't start out as an artist. I actually graduated with a degree in biology and was very focused in marine biology, and then worked as an aquarist in Southern California, where I grew up, and was scuba diving and incorporating tours on 45-foot fishing vessels, being a naturalist and collecting, and showing and educating young kids in the LA Unified School District who'd probably never been to the ocean. And what I recognized is when you are informed and experience nature in a very intense way, what happens is you become connected to it. You care about it. And I think a lot of what I do in my art is try to connect people to the work. So if I'm doing trees, for example, they have, female or human faces, they become figurative. And I think we identify more on the level of subjects rather than objects, which if you're not familiar with nature, it just feels alien to you, I'm sorry. So I have, gotten back into the arts. I was purely biology, but I worked as an interpretive designer, and I worked in science museums, and I worked in science and culture interpretive museums. And I realized that visually you can tell so much about what's happening. And that took me back to get a master's in art. And I wasn't a clay artist. I was scientific illustration. But what happened is my mom was actually doing clay, and I inherited all her stuff, and I realized I better learn how to do clay. And like Joan, it grabbed me and it took over, and I've not found anything as gripping and interesting as working with mud, basically the earth. It's very connecting on many levels. So, yeah.
As one of another artist, several artists call ceramic turning mud into stone.
Yeah.
Some of the artists in this exhibition call their process fossilization processes.
Oh, yeah.
It's really interesting. Thank you very much, Marsha. Dharma, would you like to talk about your background becoming a ceramic artist?
Sure. When I went to college, I started out as an anthropology major and took one ceramics class as a freshman and became completely obsessed. I was in the ceramics studio till midnight every night. And by the end of the year, some of the other ceramic majors sort of said, you're an art major. And it became a huge relief to me because at that point I had become totally enamored with ceramics. But my dad's a painter, and I was always also painting. So I spent my junior year studying painting, drawing, and printmaking in Italy, and then went on to pursue an MFA in ceramics at Cranbrook Academy of Art, which was a hugely multidisciplinary program. And I sort of combined painting, drawing, and ceramics in that program. And when I got out of school, I realized that I wanted to incorporate those mediums further, and I decided to create sort of hybrid uh, pieces that incorporated painting and drawing, but also tiny bits of fired porcelain on top of the paper, so that they both lived as a painting and as a low relief sculpture. So I've been pursuing works on paper that incorporate ceramic, and then most recently, since the pandemic, my practice has focused almost entirely on ceramic wall installations, and I'm happy to talk more about those as we continue.
Thank you. Mitra, your turn to talk about your ceramic past, present, and future.
Sure. I'm glad that I'm following Dharma because I also followed the same path as starting off as an anthropology major
Oh, funny.
at
Okay.
Kenyon.
That makes sense somehow.
And I happened to be dating someone at the time who was taking a 3D design class. And the moment I started playing with, in my case, it was clay, but also steel and wire. I thought, oh boy, game over. Like I can't stop thinking about art and making art. So I really the truth is that I don't necessarily consider myself strictly a ceramic artist. I consider myself a sculptor and installation artist, and I have been working with clay for the past decade, pretty routinely though, and mostly it was driven by the fact that I teach ceramics at West Valley College, so I'm very well acquainted with the material and the process, but really it was the resistors and capacitors and diodes that you see on my sculptures that really steered me towards ceramic because I was seeking a way to salvage these materials. So like my sustainability concerns come in with my material use, which it originated with the resistors, which are also ceramic and metal. And I was trying to figure out ways to express them sculpturally, and ceramic bodies just really seemed like the most logical way to go. And then, I can talk more specifically about this body of work when we elaborate on those things.
Thank you. So you just enlightened us that art can be logical.
Yeah. Indeed.
Thank you. Shiwan, would you like to talk about your artistic and ceramic journey, please?
Sure. I think it's interesting to hear other artists' past becoming the artists in working with ceramics. I feel like my past is kind of boring. Well, long story short, it started with a mistake. I really want to go to this very prestigious art school back home in China, where I'm originally from. And my first choice at that time was going to study architecture and then ceramics. But you can still see a connection of my work to architecture forms. But in that period of time, it was odd in my art school. Once I entered in the school, I cannot change majors and just started with the foundation art classes. And then in the second year, we entered into our major. and then starting working with clay and learning all kind of aspects of clay. And at that time, I really enjoyed this labor-intensive process and the tactile sense of touch working with clay. It's really messy, but I love it. And I can spend hours and hours working in the studio and just play with clay and experience all phases. And up to now, I still feel like it's fascinating, and clay is a very basic material, but has all kind of possibilities, and it can transform to anything. So after I finished my undergrad training in ceramics, I came to the States for my master's degree at Arizona State University, also in ceramics. And then that kind of led me to explore more in the material and in developing my own work and conceptually, and then building up my career as an artist and educator in the US. So in terms of the sustainability, I'm really thinking about my material approach. So I work with paper clay. That's something kind of unique for me. And I work with porcelain to start with, and it's a very expensive and precious material and really difficult to work with. And then I experimented with paper clay and then blend into the fiber into my porcelain. And then I can recycle my clay all the time. I have no waste of clay in terms of my studio process. So also working with paper clay saved a lot of my technical issues and made my studio practice very easy in a way. And also I'm thinking about like culturally in terms of the sustainability. Um, my work is in a very subtle way using the material porcelain and using the color. I kind of focusing on the blue and white color and celadon green color to like reference my Chinese cultural lineage in that sense. Yeah.
It's so interesting. Thank you, all of you, for talking a little bit about your background and experience as a ceramic artist. So everyone loves touching clay, it sounds like, and getting messy and dirty and squishing around in that stuff. I am not a ceramic artist myself, so all I can do is admire you. Although my mom used to fill up a mud hole in the backyard and have us play in the mud, so I enjoyed that a lot. So I can kind of identify. Um, so thinking about your process and materials as a ceramic artist, I know some of you do other work too, and do do some other types of work. But I'm thinking about clay. Can you talk to us about one aspect of your work that you feel that maybe you invented or that you innovated in some way, or that's kind of part of your own style of art making, whether it be the clay itself, a firing method, glazing, any one of those aspects of material and process that's really interesting to you and that you think is really an important part of what makes your work your work. Dharma, I'd like you to start with that one.
Well, as I mentioned, I sort of decided to figure out how to incorporate like the hybrid idea of painting, drawing, and ceramics being joined. But I think more recently with particularly the freefall piece, I've incorporated color into the porcelain directly, which has really changed the nature of my work. So I can talk more about the sort of history of how that freefall came to be, but just on a material note, I was working for years just with white and black clay, and that particular piece, Freefall, came about during the pandemic, and we were spending so much time as a family outside walking in nature. Nature was so vibrant that spring because everything had shut down, really. And we were all being able to sort of slow down and look at the color, pattern, texture, and nature. And I wanted to incorporate that into my ceramic sculpture. So I figured out a way to wedge pigment directly into the porcelain. So I ended up with sort of all these pots of color. And then from those colors, I was able to mix them and join them so they created sort of an ombre pattern within the chain pieces, which were then fired. And what I realized once I had fired these pieces was that because they weren't glazed, because they had movement, they also created sound. So that was another sort of sensory experience that was created with that particular process.
Mm. Thanks for that. Several guests have asked how you are able to fire the chains without the links all sticking together. Can
Right,
you
because the pigment is directly in the porcelain, so there's not a glazed element.
oh, so that helps it to not stick together.
So they don't stick together. Yeah, that's sort
Oh,
of
fantastic.
that's key to the whole process, so that they have sort of a dynamic movement to them that you wouldn't get if they were glazed and were static.
Oh, that's really great. Thank you for sharing that. Joan, I see you nodding your head over there, and you and I have talked about glazes and things, and I know that's important to your work. Would you like to talk about your processes and materials and what makes your work yours?
Well, I can't say that I'm much of an innovator or a visionary. I think I do have a perspective, though. Um, I think the most important thing is for me to look, and for all of us, I think, is we're looking at adjacent fields. And so I use a lot of woodworking tools that in my ceramics. I use a lot of fashion design tools in my ceramics. I use a lot of particularly the tools, but also the ideas. So color theory and design in adjacent fields, in interior design, I use a lot in my ceramics. And then I go to museums and find the curator. My best example is I was at the Sackler and I saw a blemish on a pot. I think it was from the Tigris and Euphrates. And by the time I just wanted that green, and I tracked down I stayed a couple days to talk to the curator. And then I figured out that it was coming from the water of the Tigris Euphrates. So then I started using Arm & Hammer baking soda to get a particular glaze color. So I can't say that I'm an innovator, but I can say that I bug people until I can get it. And I fire multiple times too. I fire. And the red that you see was that red was first formulated using glass stains because Dale Chihuly was at a show, and of course I boldly went up to him and said, "How come you guys get the red and we burn it out?" And even at low fire, and he says, "Well, I use mason stains," and I said, "Oh, I'm going to use mason glass." So adjacent fields, I can't say I'm an innovator, but I do go to adjacent fields for ideas.
Fantastic. You sound like an innovator to me, for sure. Mitra, will you talk about materials and methods and all that good stuff?
Sure. Yeah, I also don't feel like I'm a particular innovator with clay specifically. I mean, I use wheel throwing and hand building and 3D printing with clay, which, maybe a decade ago would be more innovative, but it's pretty common now. I also use slip casting as a method. So none of these are really new techniques, but maybe the way that I'm combining them and then put on top of that a foreign material, being the resistors. I think I'm just really interested in hybrids of all kinds. And really I think, I'm very concerned with materiality, but also, looking to materials that kind of have an expiration date on them. So again, not to steer us away from the clay particularly, but like the
No, but it's
resist.
fine for you to steer away from clay. Just talk, you can talk about other materials and stuff too. It's fine based on what your work is. That's what we'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so I mean, the resistors I've been working with for about a little over a decade now, and really because I find them to be a really beautiful object, and they are plentiful because the ones that I use are not really relevant anymore, as our technology seeks to get smaller and faster. Resistors are kind of antiquated and clunky, and I'm always seeking to highlight, the beauty in these objects that most of the time we are very overlooked. And so I hope that I'm innovative in the way that I'm, to my mind, like salvaging or rescuing these materials. Um, and transforming them, like giving them a new life and animating them in a way that, people aren't accustomed to seeing. So yeah.
Thank you. It sounds like everyone doesn't think they're an innovator, but they really are. Marsha, did you have an opportunity to share yet about materials, methods, firing, glazing, whatever it be?
You know, my firing and glazing is pretty traditional. I am really attracted to dry surfaces, so I tend to use stains, under glazes, pencil. I also like to incorporate found objects. I love the idea of found objects. Because I'm doing figurative work, I really look into adornment. I think we have been adorning ourselves since the beginning, whether it is scarification, whether it is pigment, whether it is, actually creating and living with other objects on us. And we are still doing that. And so a lot of times I am finding objects. I love to go to flea markets and collect things and then ultimately incorporate them, whether it's bone or wire or, all kinds of things. But I think one of the things that is hallmarked in my work is that they are connected to one another. So, for example, I have the wall behind the tree figures that is basically unglazed, low-fired paper clay. And I just created a bunch of tubes with a hole in them and then snapped those tubes with this idea of wire through them to create kind of a web, basically, which for me is the understory of the mycorrhizal fungi. So there's that, nerdy scientist coming through that wants to tell the story of, how these are connected and how information is transported. And so how do I do that? I'm looking at the white filaments in the fibers of that, and had to be light. So I'm solving the problem of how do I do this? Can't be on the floor. So it just becomes a secondary pattern on the background, which ultimately was really fun to do. I had several people helping me the first time I tried it to tack and join and move around. And I love doing that because again, it's very narrative. Whether anyone actually gets that idea is less important than incorporating it as part of a connection to what I'm working on. So I think that's generally what I'm always looking for. And on a quick note, I had done that before on a 30-foot wall, and I ended up donating it to the UC Davis Phycology Department where they study the fungi. And it was on an old wood panel with a bronze statue of a man that probably nobody ever looked at. And it just brought the wall to life. And it was so gratifying to do that because they were like, oh, we know what this is. So, yeah, I think that's kind of what I'm always seeking.
That's great. I think we'll segue to, I'm going to put the slides back up just to be able to go through the pieces because I know that the audience only got a very brief glimpse of these works. Once again, as soon as this works and changes, we'll be fine. Hold on. Because I'd like to go have each of you maybe comment a little on the piece you made for this show, but it's not. Why is it not changing? Can you see the slide?
No.
Okay, well, we're having a little IT problem here because it doesn't want to share. Let me try again. Well, darn, I'm sorry that that's not happening. I don't know why. It was working fine. Oh, there we go. Okay, let's see if this is going to do it. Okay. So since I landed on Xiwan's work, Xiwan, do you want to talk just a little about this piece or the other one if you wish? And so that people can see specifically what you're talking about your making methods and some of the ideas behind it, looking at the piece in specific?
Sure. Well, in general, I think my work really highlights the beauty, fragility, rhythm, and harmony found within the growth system of the micro life forms. So I'm very interested in small living organisms, and they're very biomorphic and abstract, abstract and structural. And I have this particular interest in those structures within those tiny life forms, because for me, those are the traces of how they grow, how they expand, and how the remaining from their decay. So that's why my work is very structural. So, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I started working with porcelain itself because all of the inspiration imageries um, is basically black and white imageries of microscopic images. And because of that, that's a starting point. And then this kind of structure is very difficult to work with by using the porcelain as material. So if people don't know the porcelain, it feels like um, buttery, kind of like a cheese kind of texture and very soft, very pretty, but difficult to work with. So I had a lot of failures at the early stage developing the work. And then I experimented with paper clay that really saved my whole studio practice. So basically is by adding cellulose fiber into the clay body to increase the work strength of during the making process and has less cracks, which really helped me so much to go through the building process and really gave me the possibility to work bigger and in more dynamic forms. So I hand built my work with single slabs. So it's like playing with Lego kind of process, adding a piece and adding another piece, like each time slowly growing from a small, like the center part of the piece, and then growing fully towards the surrounding piece as one piece as a whole. So it's a very slow process to start with, just in building. And then I had a crazy firing process as well, because my work is reflecting very organic kind of creatures. And I really want to give this organic quality. So I use a very heavy texture glaze on my piece. And maybe it's not easy to see on the image here, but if you see the piece in person, you will notice it's very fuzzy, very invite people to touch, which is always like a concern for me. So it's repetitive firing and it's spraying glaze, firing one time and go back with the process over and over again until I feel the piece is finished. So from the starting point of making my own clay to the end, it's a quite long journey for my piece to grow. But I think it's kind of like very therapeutic. Normally, we don't, like in our contemporary daily life, we're not spending so much time and don't have much focus in time, just want to do all kind of things all at once. But really spending time slow down in studio and see the work evolving over time is something really interested me. And I want to keep exploring that and expand and provide that kind of feeling to my audience as well.
Fantastic. Thank you for all those details. We wouldn't be able to read them into it without you here to tell us about the work. Let me see who comes up next. Joan. I'm biased because this is one of my favorite pieces of Joan's work. So if you can unmute yourself and talk to us a little bit about the interesting, way that you make these, but conceive of them as well.
Well, I'm maybe making a postmodern, because that's what we do in art school. We try to be postmodern sometimes, or at least we tried. So there's a hearkening to blue and white porcelains, but this is not porcelain, this is earthenware. But then, of course, there's a vessel tradition. And I was talking about this in 2008 about our addiction to fossil fuels. I guess we're still addicted to fossil fuels, aren't we? And the SUV and the invention of the catalytic converter allowed us to have bigger cars and consume more fossil fuels, but at a cheaper rate. But we would continue to drill. This was part of a series that was even worse, that was received very poorly, even though, because I was more worried at the time in 2008, 2007 about mortgages. And so I did a whole series of tipping points, that we were going to hit a tipping point about with bankruptcies. We were going to have a lot of foreclosures. We were going to have resets. So I did a whole series of cups about what would happen if the banks go, or Lehman Brothers did go. And so a lot of people, when these finally came out, found my work to be too scary to even touch. And this was these were distributed over at LACMA at a, I don't know, a dinner or something like that, and the collectors might even buy it. But people were just so frightened, because I was talking about environmental disaster. I was talking about a warning about environmental disaster, and warning about subprime lending, and warning about viruses. I was actually warning about contagions, and that we could have a pandemic, because my father told me about the 1918 Spanish flu. So I had little viruses running around on these things. So I guess what I would later on do is a whole series about also the .com bust. And I had all these ticker symbols that are no longer, companies that are no longer around. And so it's kind of scary when I start talking about something or making something, about 5 to 10 years later, something really terrible happens. So that is kind of where I am. Even the California wildfires, which is the one that I don't know if you can advance it, but the California wildfires I did long before I had to evacuate from the Eaton Canyon fire a year ago. So I did this because, as a result of what I saw in Northern California. And I was just these wildfire, and also in Oregon, that we can't put them out. And of course, these are all climatic issues that, there's just way too much fuel. The angle of repose in my neighborhood of the mountain, the San Gabriel Mountains, are so steep that a debris flow is inevitable. And of course, many lives will be lost when we have a debris flow. I live in an area where about 500 homes are in danger. So I've evacuated, I don't know how many times so far this year, because of flood warnings. But this is what happens when we defy nature. I'm one of those. I'm one of nature's nitwits, as John McPhee wrote in New Yorker magazine, that I am one of those people who live in Los Angeles against the mountains.
Thank you, Joan. Let's see where my cursor goes next. There we go. Dharma, you talked about both the paintings and the chain works. Do you want to say more?
Yeah. So my work is really about the interaction between our built and natural world and human connectivity, and the way that humans gravitate towards pattern to make sense of our world. And Free Fall came about because my studio's in the shipyards of Sausalito, and there's all this remnant of World War II shipbuilding right outside my studio, particularly these really giant and sculpturally beautiful anchor chains. So the piece started out as just an exploration of place. And then the pandemic hit, and that painting studio closed. I had to be back home working in my home studio, which is where my ceramics are. And I was homeschooling 3 kids and making ceramic chains every single day for 2 months or more was the only way that I kept my sanity. And what I realized as I was making these chains was that they were actually such an interesting metaphor for what was going on during that time, because each of those chains is hand built, connected to one another, dependent on one another, living in a large group. And of course, that's exactly what we were going through during the pandemic. So they really became less about Sausalito and shipbuilding and more about human connectivity and the importance of understanding, especially in the world that we live in right now, which is extremely disconnected. And I think we're really distracted by our technology and our phones. And being connected to one another and making work by hand has become sort of a lifeline for a lot of artists, and a lot of people are recognizing now how important that is moving forward.
Thank you so much for more info. It seems like any artist can talk about so much context for the works that helps us to be able to understand it better, and broadens the context for which we can place it. Marsha, you talked a little too about your pieces and how they came about, and want to say some more?
Well, I really love working in clay, and it's such a three-dimensional medium because I can create these very tall freestanding figures with stacking. I could stack them to the ceiling. But I think for me, it's the environment is always going to be coming through. My concern certainly is what we are doing and not doing to really consider the environment. And it is so connected. We have breath because of how we, live in this world, and to contaminate the air, the water, to change these ecologies and environments are so critical. And it's always in my mind, and it is the ultimate leveler in terms of what we're making and doing and thinking and creating. It's always present for me, that it's a consideration. And so I find it always part of my work. Trees are part of it, but also all the things that they sustain, the ecology the little microclimates that they create. So it's just interesting for me to think about what's happening, what I can and can't do, I know even during the pandemic, these were in my studio, and I was running this small business called Clay Art Studio, and it had a big window that faced the sidewalk, which led to a massive park that was really the people's park. And I was listening about the pandemic. When the pandemic hit, we were all inside, unless you went to a park. And so people would walk by this window, and I filled the window with these figures and these foxes and these, and everything was looking out the window. And I literally would watch people stop and look in. And it was this disconnection, but in community. And I think, I think that art and creating elevate us in our spirit. I mean, the making of something is really, it's really grounding for people. I also teach, and so I find people coming just to be mostly in community and making. And the creation of art has been ever since we could find materials to make something with. And I think that is really critical, that as artists, we still give voice to things, whatever that medium is, whatever our narrative or non-narrative is. It's really important in this time, especially.
So interesting, Marsha. Thank you for sharing all those thoughts. A lot of this work, as audiences noticing, is abstract, what we might call abstract, not figural pieces. And there are a few that are, yours, of course, being one, that are figural, but everyone who looks at it and looks into these faces, everyone's peering into the faces when they come to the exhibition, says, but they don't look like human or feel like human faces.
Right.
They feel like life faces or spirit faces or something. And I think you definitely managed to convey that deep sense and deep feeling in your work, and we appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Mitra, you talked about the capacitors, which some people may have envisioned and some may not have. But when I first saw your work, I was so intrigued by the fact that computer parts are made with ceramic in tiny, tiny little form. And I did not know that until I met you and your work. And so I wonder, I know you've spoken about it, but if you'd like to talk about this piece or the work for this exhibition, please do.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, as I said before, the resistors and capacitors and diodes kind of came first, because I happened to come across like a massive, massive quantity of them. And I tend to work with large quantities of whatever material I've been working with. And some of my other work with the ceramic combined with the resistors looks a little bit different. It looks a little bit more clinical and clean and untextured. And then I guess survived a fire myself. I was living in the Santa Cruz Mountains when the CZU fires happened. And my wife and I had to evacuate for about 3 weeks. And we were lucky we did not lose our home. But, going back to that space and living, in the spaces that Joan kind of mentioned, like precarious in the mountains, in nature, with fire as a constant danger, and flood and all the other forces as well. It really prompted me to want to express my experience of going through those fires, and the fear that comes with it, the sense of responsibility as a human who is, living in these spaces and despite our best efforts, kind of contributing to climate change and other environmental deteriorations. But also I witnessed so much beauty there too. And so, after those sets of fires were done, there was rebuilding, there was regrowth. And I had the opportunity to exhibit at NUMU, which is the little museum in Los Gatos, very close to where I teach. And I knew that I needed to create a new body of work to express my experience. And so instead of these clean, minimalist ceramic forms onto which I adhered the resistors, I instead made these patterns using good old construction material of expanding insulation foam. I made plaster molds of those, and then I also had some commercial molds of animal parts, uh, deer hooves and antlers and things like that. Um, and so I used these molds to slip cast a lot of these ceramic forms and then, perforated all of the surfaces to accommodate the resistors later. And what you don't see with the two pieces that are at the Palo Alto Art Center was the larger installation that I created with a total of 15 of these sculptures. And they were situated in a burned wooden structure that I created from salvaged wood that I then burned myself, and then created an enclosure that was akin to like a perimeter fence or that you might find around a house. Um, and so these sculptures were then living on and around this burned wooden structure. Um, and so the dialogue or I guess the monologue in my head was just all about how disasters happen, and we are absolutely implicit in a lot of that. And the ceramic forms really became my kind of wild imaginings of the kinds of growths that could happen after a natural disaster. So they are kind of fungal in some instances, and they are animal in other instances. And then the inclusion of the resistors and capacitors are kind of my stand-in for human intervention, like our tendency as human beings to want to dominate nature and correct nature, and how things very rapidly get out of control and backfire on us like all the time. And then the wooden enclosure was really just again kind of talking about that human wildland interface and our need as humans or desire to kind of say this is mine, like these are my walls, this is my house. And I think that we often struggle to live in symbiosis with nature, um, and that's basically the story of those pieces.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. We're at the point where we have to stop. We could go on and on forever. But it's just so amazing how, even though I've spoken with all the artists, many times leading up to the exhibition and since, it's clear the detail that they're telling us about their wonderful creative lives in philosophical, thoughtful, scientific, learned ways in which they integrate aesthetic sensibility, beauty, with some of the most important and often difficult aspects of living on our wonderful planet Earth. Hopefully we are becoming, at least some of us, more aware of, in our era of coexistence with the Earth and its equal lives, and knowing with more knowledge about how our actions can affect the earth. And we're just very, very fortunate that we have artists who can teach us that in the most beautiful and thoughtful ways. Thank you so much. Thank you for attending.
So at this point, I do want to be able to open it up for questions in case any of our audience has questions for the panel. You can simply click the Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom screen and kind of type in your question, or you can also raise your hand and I can unmute you. I do want to acknowledge that we do have some of the other artists in the exhibition. Richard Shaw had was unable to connect to audio, so we just want to let him know that we see that he is here, Leslie Plato-Smith and Kayla Stein. I also want to acknowledge that I did misspeak. Meta Huberman was our exhibition's intern. I was channeling someone else clearly. So if anyone has questions, I want to give folks a chance to chime in. I do have one question, Rina, if I can direct it to the
Please,
panel.
no, please, anybody.
I
Yeah.
know it was actually one of Rina's questions, but we have one in that. I'm going to go ahead and ask my question, which is, making things with clay has an environmental impact. And I know that some of you are actively working to address that. I know that Xuan mentioned that. I wonder if some of you can kind of speak to practices that you are considering or actually using in your work to address the environmental impact of ceramics.
I can just briefly say that we installed solar panels so that yeah, I mean, basically the huge environmental impact for my work is kiln firing and energy use. And so that has mitigated a lot of that. So that's one sort of basic thing that we've done in the last 5 years.
And Joan, yeah.
As the head bottle washer at Otis College of Art and Design, we have to go through accreditation, which is you evaluated whether you're a real place or something. And one of the critiques was that I did not install gas kilns at Otis when I was tapped to bring ceramics back to Otis, because Otis lost its mind and closed the ceramics program and then asked me to reopen it. So they came, I don't know, they were enlightened or something. But at any rate, I refused to install gas kilns and went on electronic, computer assisted scut kilns. At the time was using experimenting with space shuttle tiles. So I was making sure that they were lined properly. JPL is not too far from me, so I got wiring from JPL to create my own wires. So and then but we still didn't get accreditation because we did not have a gas kiln. So I just said, forget it. I don't care about, this. Someday you're going to be very, very sorry. And of course, I think the gas kiln will be outlawed at this point pretty soon. We can't have gas stoves in California, right? New gas stoves are not available. So somebody's going to just figure out that gas kilns are probably not a good idea too. But this was 20 years ago that I said, I'm not doing gas. So I think we all have to think about that. And I fire differently now too. I don't have as many firings each year. I've cut probably my firings, the number of firings down by about 35%, 40%. And I fire at night.
I guess I can speak to that a little bit too, especially as an educator, really just stressing conservative use of materials and not to stymie, creativity or innovation, but really stressing to students that these materials are finite. And, those of you who are interested in glaze formulation and all that kind of stuff, you're probably realizing that like so many of the mines are tapped out. Like a lot of the materials we've been using for decades are no longer. And so we're having to innovate and, come up with alternate materials. But I think for me personally, it's about being very thoughtful when I'm making things and when they fail, I personally never throw away clay, and really stressing in the academic studio, like reclaim, like as much as you can. Yeah.
I think the Peter Pugger is probably one of the greatest inventions ever. Able to cut our clay costs. And I even take clay over to the college, even though I'm retired, but you know, Peter Pugger is quite impressive. That recycles clay. We can take clay, recycle it.
Indeed. There's another question from the audience that I would like to pose to the group. It seems like many of the great moments in our life are unplanned. Sometimes they are called mistakes, but they can lead to something beautiful. Would any of you like to talk about a time when you thought you were making a mistake and it turned into something meaningful? Joan, I think you're muted.
I screw up a lot, but my greatest mistake was having the washing machine next to my gold. And so I contaminated my gold, which is, you know, expensive, real gold, with Tide detergent. And what it did was created a resist. So it was pretty cool. Dishwashing liquid too. I got it all mixed up, and same thing. Resist.
I guess I don't know about mistake, but I feel like experimentation is really critical. And, you know, so many of you talk about your real scientific backgrounds. I feel like I'm a wannabe scientist, but, you know, just that embracing that willingness to make mistakes so that you learn something new and something surprising comes out of the work. I think, you know, before I really hit my stride with the way that I utilize resistors, I made a lot of awful pieces, you know, and I think that that's really part of any artist process is just getting to know your materials and being willing to make dumb things before you get to something that's feels right.
Yeah.
I had an experience just last week where I'm getting ready for a big show, and my studio is filled with large sculptures, and I was working on a particular large piece that I created chains for a long time for it, and I had a smaller piece that was working, and the bigger piece wasn't at all working. And at sort of right before I left the studio, like the final hour, I broke the big piece so that I could use the parts for the smaller piece that was working. So I sort of relinquished the big non-working piece. And it was sort of a moment where I went, oh my God, I can't believe I did this. I gave up on that big piece, but it was the right idea. Sometimes you have to break things that you love in order to make the work better. And it's super scary, but those are the decisions that often that are the difference between a good piece and a great piece.
And if I can add very quickly, many times I'm working on a figure and I'm trying to get the head and rush the process, which you can never do with clay. Never. It will always win. My heads will fall and hit the ground. And what I realize is you cannot, or at least for me, when you get so precious with a piece and you're struggling with it, you have to let go, because it's always a conversation with the clay. The clay has its boundaries and it won't and will do things. And I'm actually going to teach a class because in my studio, we have maybe 8 students and they're from all over, and there's a preciousness to what they're working on and they have to get it right. So I'm going to teach just a workshop called Letting Go, where you make something and then you drop it, because as everyone here on this panel, I'm sure we've had pieces blow up and get lost and not really hit the mark. And you just keep going. You can't stay too connected to something. It teaches us, really. to let go. And I think that that's a valuable lesson for everyone.
Yeah, I'm gonna add a couple more thoughts here. And I think just because from my own training background back home, I learned everything needs to be perfect, like in a hard way. And then in grad school, there was a moment I was kind of lost. I don't know what to do. And then I was talking to my old professor, Kurt Weiser, and he gave me this assignment specifically to make failures. So I think that was really like wonderful in a way to think about like play with the material and to experiment, to make mistakes, which I was kind of afraid of. And that kind of changed my approach and try to break rules in my practice. And specifically at that time, I kind of discovered the gooey glaze. It's very popular now, but it was almost like 10 years ago in grad school. I was kind of discovered that. And then in my teaching right now, I also like encourage my students to make mistakes. And I know sometimes can be frustrating, but it is a learning opportunity to turn into something unexpected.
Amazing. Thank you all. Rina, do you want to end with some closing comments?
Well, no, I already made mine, but
Okay, fair
I'm
enough.
also no, but I'm also thinking about this, and I just want to share, from a curator's and academics perspective. It was the wildfires in 2017 and in the wine country in California that was the mistake. We can call it a historical mistake that created my focus on needing to like you guys need to need clay, but I can't make anything to save my life is my famous statement. And so for me, showing artists is the most important thing that I can do. And when the fires came through our property, we live on the top of a mountain between the Napa and Sonoma valleys. It did not destroy our house, but it burned the entire 20 acres of mature forest that I live in. And and I realized at that moment, honestly, we were out of our home for 7 months. And I realized at that moment that my academic life, which was focused on the environment and environmental history and even art history, was now a reality for me. And that my real life needed to be about getting artists like yourselves to show us through your work what the importance of environment and planetary health really is for us. So I'm in there batting right in there with you, artists, creating exhibitions so that we can show your work.
Great.
Thank you, Karen, for making it possible.
Of course. I want to thank Rina Faletti for curating such a wonderful exhibition, for all of the artists included within it, the artists who joined us today. I encourage you all, if you haven't seen the show, to come by and see it. We are open 7 days a week, and the exhibition is up through April 5th. So once again, thank you all. Really appreciate you all attending this and look forward to seeing you at the Art Center.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Karen and Rina. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, audience. Good night.
Good night.